Welcome to One Sharp Sword, cutting through to what matters most. I'm your host, Dr. P, Dr. Wayne Purnell, the Breakthrough Success Coach. I have with me today Michael Roderick, who I had the pleasure of having dinner with, and we met through a mutual friend and producer. And Michael moved from being a high school teacher to a Broadway producer, which is kind of exciting. He sends out daily blog posts, which I subscribe to because I find them fascinating. It's truly, I mean, we all have so much in our email boxes that to ask for one more daily email, it's a big deal. So I do subscribe. He is the CEO and founder of Small Pond, and that means that one of the things he stands for is that he helps thoughtful givers move to thought leaders. Michael, thank you for being here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited that you are here. So high school teacher, let's back up. Let's go into the Wayback Machine. We're stepping into time, and you thought to yourself, I would love to put myself in front of adolescents and like, what happened?
Yeah, well, my mother was a kindergarten teacher. And when I was very, very young, I used to go and help her on the last day of school. So I would always sort of go and sort of help out. And then when I got into high school, I basically was just always fascinated with my teachers. Like I really just I got along better with my teachers, than most students. And I remember in my senior year, we had an English class where my teacher, Mr. Riley, gave us this assignment where he basically gave us the assignment to teach the class. And it was the first time I had ever done it. And I remember going up there and I was doing this presentation of this poem. And I'll never forget, I came up with this idea to hand out candy and basically have everybody close their eyes and have the candy while reading this certain part of the poem because it had something to do with sweetness or something like that. And I remember sitting down after presenting, and Mr. Riley coming up to me and saying, you have it. It's like there are a lot of people out there, but you really have it. And it was the first time anybody sort of acknowledged me in that way. So I had always been interested in it. And when I got into college, I just went secondary ed English, ended up being my major. And I found I just loved teaching. I loved seeing students get it. I loved seeing them sort of understand it. I was originally even going to go into the path my mom had gone into and be a kindergarten teacher. But I realized pretty much right within that first year that I much preferred the high school level. So I'd actually switched out of elementary and went into secondary within my first year.
That's fabulous. I used to work with adolescents. I used to work with runaways, and it really takes, for you to choose to step into the high school teaching arena, it takes something special. So that's awesome. Plus a focus on English and language, and just knowing language matters so much, and we sometimes take it for granted. I appreciate it. I appreciate one of the reasons I subscribe to your blog every day is that I appreciate your use of language and how colorful it is and how quickly you can drop somebody into the space of, well, imagine this, and without actually saying, now imagine this, you've brought us right into this world. So it's great, and it's a quick read. So I am if you haven't noticed, I'm highly endorsing that our audience just please take a look and subscribe. I'll give you the opportunity at the end of our podcast to say where, and
Sure.
I'll certainly put it in the show notes. So you were doing that for how long?
So I taught high school for 8 years total.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then somewhere in that 8 years, because you don't just go, well, I'm done teaching high school, I think I'll go produce a play or a show. It's somewhere along the lines you were exposed to Broadway, and you were like, this has to be my path. Like, there is something special. I will say, I'm based in California, and I just literally, at the time of this recording, I just literally got back yesterday from New York. Spent about a week there. And every time I'm there is something compelling that just is like, you must, it's like the heart and soul of New York. There's this beat that you feel. It's so good. So talk a little bit about that. Like, you were teaching, you were inspiring students, you could see the lights coming on, and that is the special part, I think, of connecting with adolescents, is that when the light comes on, it really comes on.
Yeah.
And you thought to yourself, what? Like, you were exposed to Broadway. What happened? How did you do that?
Yeah, so I was running the drama program at the school. So I basically, was teaching English during the day, but I ran the drama program. I sort of helped students, put on plays and put on productions. And I had my own small theater company where I was, putting up shows on a fairly regular basis, and sort of that smaller show kind of environment, the 99 seat and under world of off Broadway. And I got to know a lot of people sort of within the industry. I got to know a lot of people who were working on sort of different projects, and I went and saw this panel of Broadway producers, and I was watching this panel and just really fascinated with sort of the whole world of it and the journey that these people went on. And the theater that the panel was happening in, and I actually knew the person who ran and sort of managed that theater, because I had rented that theater multiple times, and I had sort of gone through that process and everything. And at the end of this panel, I am watching everybody sort of flooding up to these Broadway producers and thinking, well, it's gonna take me a long time to talk to any of these folks. And she kind of just like sidled up to me and said, everybody's trying to get to talk to these people, but they're all just going to be hanging out at our Christmas party. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I get an invite to the Christmas party for that theater. So I get to the Christmas party, and there are the producers that I had seen on that, that panel. Obviously far less swamped, with individuals. And I remember I didn't have a lot of time because I was actually running a show at the time. So I had to like run to a show right after. So I had about a half hour or so.
Wow.
And
speed networking.
Exactly. So I noticed that one of the producers, I saw her just kind of hanging out, and she was talking to a couple of others. And I remember having this moment where I was really worried about interrupting her. I was really worried about sort of just like breaking in on a conversation. And I remember the conversation I had in my head where I was basically, saying, if you don't go up and have this conversation, you might as well forget about being a Broadway producer.
So this is cool. This is like one of the things that I do in my podcast specifically is I will interrupt my guests.
Yeah.
Because that is a teaching moment. That is a teaching moment. That if like that piece, the thing in your head, it's like, if you don't, the thing you wanted that's right there in front of you will evaporate. And it's like, that is, so many people have a different conversation, which is, I can't, who am I to interrupt? Why should I do that? They're going to think of me badly, And you're like, if I don't do this now, my chances are gone. And I love love that, because that's the lesson for every single moment of every single day. I love that. So
thank you.
so that was the interruption, the teaching modes, like that.
Yeah.
That. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I had that conversation with myself, and I was basically like, okay, well, I'm just going to go up. And I interrupted, and I basically said, so sorry to interrupt. I saw you on this panel, and I really just was fascinated with Broadway producing. And I just kind of, sort of talked about how I was really interested in it. And she stopped me and she said, well, what do you do now? And I said, well, I'm a high school English teacher. And she was like, oh, that's fat. And she was fascinated by that. Right. And she was asking me about teaching and like all these different types of things. And I was answering those questions. And then she said, well, what are you doing tomorrow night? And I said, well, I'm on the wait list for, one of the shows that's, coming up. She said, nope, you're coming with me. And she invited me to a gathering of members of the Broadway League. It was basically like a little cocktail gathering of a bunch of other Broadway producers. So I go to this, I get to meet all of these other producers, and now I've got kind of this circle of people who fit into this Broadway world. And I find out that there's actually a way that people become Broadway producers. And there's a training program. There's a way that this happens. And I was fascinated by this. I was like, wait a second, it just doesn't happen. And I found out about this thing called CTI, which is the Commercial Theater Institute. And it was started a number of years back. And it was basically originally started to teach investors how to invest in Broadway shows. But over time, it became this program that basically, if you're interested in becoming a Broadway producer, they bring in a bunch of other famous Broadway producers to walk you through the ropes of, how do you get started and how do you build, and how do you move this industry forward and all of those different types of things. So I found out about it, and now I kind of knew, okay, well, this is the thing. So I started looking at, okay, well, who is, in that world, who's gone through the program before? Could any of them write me a letter of recommendation? And my first time out, of course, I got rejected. Right? They have a 14-week program that they run. They do a 3-day intensive, which is like hundreds of people, and then they have a 14-week program that is specifically focused on, like, if you're really in it, like, this is where you'd build all the relationships. Like, this is where things happen.
Amazing.
And I got rejected, first time. And then I, spent the rest of that year building up my credibility, getting to know other producers, getting another really good letter of recommendation. And in my second year, I got accepted into that program. All the while, I was still teaching high school.
Wow.
Yeah.
What I love also is that, first of all, the conversation in your head that said you must talk to these people. The second thing is that when you went to the gathering, right, that you also said what you did. And it wasn't like, I have to inflate what I do, I have to make this grand story. It was, this is what I do. Yeah. And that is enough. Right? That sometimes, right? Sometimes we try so hard to be so much bigger and it comes off as inauthentic.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
100%. 100%.
And so to just go, I teach high school.
Yeah.
It's like, that's awesome. And that was the reaction. That's awesome. How fascinating. How wonderful. Yeah. And then the process of, you don't just become this thing, that you have goals and it takes work.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, and I applied and I got in. What you said was, and I applied, and of course I was rejected the first time.
Yeah.
And I love that too, because so often we think, well, I applied and I didn't get in, so that's a sign that I'm not good enough. That's a sign. It's like, no, that's a sign that you didn't get in the first time. That's what it's a sign of. Right? So,
exactly.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. So what was your first production? Like, you got trained, you got in, you met all the right people, you figured out how to do this.
Yeah.
I did not know that there was a commercial theater institute. That's
Yeah.
fascinating as well.
Yeah. So it was interesting because I was involved in a lot of projects before I got my name on a project. So there's a very big difference between you raising money for something and you having your name above the title or being considered a producer on the sort of official books of the project, right? But
Contributor, like contributor versus producer. Right?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But interestingly enough, I attribute that to how I moved so quickly within the industry. So the industry is geared towards credit, right? So the idea is you go to other producers and you say, I'll raise this amount of money for you, and then I will get credit on the show. I will be considered a producer, on the show, which, begins that relationship from a standpoint of like, you really have to prove yourself in terms of how much you can raise. Like, you have to really be on top of it. And you have to spend a lot of time sort of building up the trust and building up those relationships, right? So when I learned that the key component of Broadway was raising money, I actually started by just going to producers that I admired and that I was interested in, and then basically saying, listen, I'm new, so I have no idea how successful I'm going to be at this. So I'm not going to ask you for credit because I can't guarantee that I'm going to raise anything. But if you're willing to give me the paperwork, if you're willing to give me a shot at just kind of going out there and letting other folks know about this and finding some potential investors on the project, I'm more than happy to try. And what ended up happening was a bunch of producers gave me their paperwork, which meant that when I was going to investors, rather than just having one project that I was raising money on, I had a portfolio, which meant I could, if somebody didn't like one project, I actually had 3 or 4 others that I could show them. So I ended up raising money behind the scenes without my name on anything for a good chunk of that time. And it was basically just a credibility builder. And it wasn't until another producer sort of saw that I was raising this money and doing things on these other projects, because it was kind of coming through the grapevine, right, that she sat me down and said, I know that you can raise this money. I've seen you do it for others, and I would like to offer you the opportunity to get credit on this show.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. You're familiar with Zig Ziglar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So one of his famous quotes, you can have anything you want if you help enough other people get what they want. And,
yep.
You going out and saying, I don't need anything except experience right now. Let me help you. That's fantastic. That is another lesson that I wanted to pause at and just say, sure, that is gigantic, right? That you didn't, I'm like, so many people set out and they go, I want to be this. And then when they're not this, automatically, whatever the this is, they're like, well, this, that must not be the thing or whatever. Instead of, I want to be this, what does it take to become that? Mm-hmm. What are the steps to actually become that versus I want to be this? Why is nobody paying attention to me? I'm saying I'm this. So you took the steps and you were not expecting to be called producer, and someone said it's time. Yep. And I love that. That is also part of the dream, right? Somebody, like, you do enough work and somebody goes, well, you are that person. Yeah. It's like, oh, I will take that mantle on. I will wear that crown. That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. So, so how many shows have you produced? I don't know any of this about your background.
Yeah. So I was like helping raise money on probably anywhere between, I would say, 7 to 10 different different projects, whether it be that I was raising a small chunk of change for the show, or whether it was that I was introducing them to other producers, or whether it was that I was actually, my name was on the, was on the project, or I was with a team of people who were sort of on the project. So it wasn't a ton, it wasn't a ton of shows during, during that time, but I definitely ended up helping a lot of shows, happen.
What's the threshold? Like, can you share that? Like, what's the threshold when you say I'm going to raise money for a show? Is it 100,000, 500,000, 3 million? Like, what does it take to launch a Broadway show and be called a producer?
Yeah, so it really actually depends on the show, and it depends on the size of the budget of the show, because everything is basically, if you imagine the budget, you're breaking down that budget, and each person is kind of responsible for a certain amount, a percentage basically of the raise of that budget. And the larger the percentage you raise, the more credit you get, the higher your name goes up on the actual, on the playbill. Right. So there's above the title, and an above the title producer could have raised anywhere between, 500,000 to $1 million to, multi-millions, depending again on the budget of the show. Right. But then you've got below the title, which those are producers who have raised smaller amounts. And then you've got below the title with a slash. So you may have, if you're looking at a Broadway playbill, seen, this person's name slash and then maybe the name of a company, right? That slash means that each person basically raised half of what was required to be below the title. Oh, okay. So let's say it was a $500,000 cap to be able to be a below the title producer on one of those projects, or 250,000, let's just say. Then each of those people on either side of the slash raised 125,000.
I got you.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, the numbers really break down quite a bit. So there have been Broadway shows, depending on this, again, the size of the budget, where people have been able to be an investor in a Broadway show for about $10,000. Right. There have also been, instances where you could probably be a producer on a show, especially if it was hurting for money and they were trying to raise, because ink, as they say in the industry, ink is cheap, right? So, to have your name as a producer, if you can write a $75,000, $100,000 check, you can just get the producer title, as opposed to like being, and that's what happened on a lot of shows, on a lot of projects. People who had no, sort of bearing in the theater whatsoever, were just like, okay, yeah, I'll write you a big check, and then you can sort of give me the producer title.
Is there an expectation that as a producer, is there an expectation that money is repaid?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's an expectation, but not an expectation in the context of guarantee.
Right. It's not a loan. It's a percentage of profit.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's an investment scenario. So unlike film, where basically you raise the amount of money and then there are really no other costs, right? Like the film is in the can and you've already spent all the money that you need to spend. Broadway is a living, breathing thing. So every week you have what's called an operating cost, right? And it costs you a certain amount to run that show. So if your ticket sales make just enough to cover your operating costs, or less than your operating costs, then your show is probably going to not run very long. And your investors aren't going to make any money. But if your show does really well and makes above the operating costs, everything above the operating costs starts being distributed first to your investors. So if you're a producer, and this is why they say in producing, you can't make a living, but you can make a killing.
Got it.
Because until your investors are made whole, you as the producer don't make any money. But once your investors are made whole, then that goes to a 50-50 split. The investors keep making money, but now you start making money every week off of the operating cost.
That's incredible. Good. Whew. That is quite an education. All right, so
Yeah.
let's jump ahead just a little bit in your
Sure.
timeline
Yeah.
to Small Pond.
Mhm.
So thank you for that education, because
Of course.
that's brand new to me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that most of my audience didn't know that that's how Broadway productions came about.
Yeah.
Hey, I have an idea. Let's put on a show.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So good. So Small Pond, which I assume implies big fish in a small pond, the way you do it.
Yep.
Because what you're doing is you're helping people highlight who they are,
Yep.
and you are helping people network and brand themselves in a big way. So talk a little bit about that, because I love that concept as well. I love your work. If you can't tell, I'm a big fan. So
thank you.
You are welcome.
Yeah. So basically what I have seen time and time again is that the thoughtful giver, the person who is very, very good at supporting others, the person who loves to help, the person who does really, really great work, is also the most likely to deprioritize the packaging of their own intellectual property. So they could do this work and do really, really great things, but they will always put off saying, how would I explain the work that I do? Right? They would put off that packaging kind of piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I learned in my own journey was the reason why I ended up in all of the rooms I got into was because people would talk about me when I wasn't in the room in a good way. And that always came down to the ways I would explain things, the ways I packaged my ideas. So what I do these days is I go to those thoughtful givers, those thoughtful companies, those people who they have a good understanding of what they do, but they don't know yet how to turn it into that element of thought leadership. They don't know yet how to craft what I call their if. So lots of entrepreneurs know their why. Lots of companies know their why, but very, very few ever take the time to get to know and understand their if. And their if,
yeah, say more about that,
is their innovative framework. An innovative framework is you taking the time to break down how you see the world, how you see things differently, and what people can do with the information that you've now given them. And when you craft that, when you come up with that concept, that idea, it turns into books, it turns into projects, it turns into consulting, it turns into interview requests. All of these things happen when you take the time to sit down and say, what is my innovative framework? What is the thing that I have to share? What is my thought leadership? And that's what I love pulling out of people. That's what I love helping them think through. That's what I love helping them see. And the metaphor that I often use for this is that if your business or your brand was a Broadway show, would anybody buy a ticket? If not, you've got to start looking at that. You've got to start looking at that, because the people who love you and the people who already know you, they're always going to buy from you, because the relationship will always make the sale. It's the people beyond the relationship that you need to reach. So if you're not creating that element of thought leadership and specifically creating referability in your business, if you're not making it so that other people are talking about your ideas and you when you're not there, you're always going to be within just that same circle of people who already kind of know what you're doing and are willing to support you in your ventures.
Huge. That's huge. I'm going to repeat something you said. I'm going to paraphrase something you said because I'm not saying it exactly your way, although I'm using your language, I think. If your business were a Broadway show, would anyone buy a ticket and refer? So two things. One is we know in marketing it's about being known, liked, and trust. Right? Know, like, trust. Those are the three key elements. And what you've said is that's great. Know, like, trust, and endorse or purchase, which is really great. If your business were a Broadway show, would anyone buy a ticket? What do they know about your business versus, or in addition to, or on top of what they know about you, the relationship? The first part of my business in growing my business was about how well I was known by certain people. And my pond has expanded because, right. So I'm being known more and more, and moving beyond a very particular niche. I love the idea of, and are you being talked about in such a way that people will refer to you?
Yeah.
And that's going to go, if you think about your business, I have lots of friends who are authors, and they're like, how do I get my book out there? I have lots of friends who are entrepreneurs, which is, they have the entrepreneurial seizure of, I think I'm good enough, I should just start a business.
Yeah.
And then it's like, selling what to whom, right? And how do you package it? So I love your magic. I really love that is your magic, that you take the idea and you make it brandable. Are there any success stories you can talk about?
Sure.
Case study kind of things?
Yeah. So there have been lots of people over the years who they were selling the wrong thing, right? Or they were selling the thing that wasn't nearly as valuable as what was sort of in the background of what they had to offer. So one of these was a photographer that I had worked with, and I remember in the early stages, the way that he was selling his work was focused on, I'm going to get you lots of social media images. You're going to have lots of material to use. And, as we talked, it was like, well, that's a commodity kind of thing. Just having more images doesn't really make us want to spend additional money. Right.
Right.
But when we talked about why he was doing what he was doing, and we really kind of dug in, he was talking about having this passion for being able to show people as they really are. And that was what he was excited by. He was excited by the idea that you could show up to a photo shoot and not feel fake.
I love that. And
right. That was the thing when he brought, I was like, that is what you're selling.
Yeah. Authenticity. I'm going to capture you in your authentic space.
Exactly. Awesome. So he started writing about that. He started selling that, and it made it so that the offer was significantly more compelling.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So much more compelling, much more powerful.
Because a photographer, I mean, you can look through a portfolio and go, yeah, good images, right? But wow, good images that capture the actual essence of somebody versus a glam shot. Love it.
Yep.
Love it.
Exactly. And most of the time, this is I often like to refer to this as like your side dish often becomes your main.
That's
right.
Awesome.
And all too often what happens is we have something that we do that we consider the side dish, but until we really kind of explore it, we're not going to know which thing is actually going to hit the audience, right? So, and I'm a perfect example. When I first got started, I was always selling networking, right? And The challenge with selling any kind of networking product or education is that networking has far too many variables for you to show success for the client.
Right.
So I could teach you the best networking education in the world. I could give you all of the world-class material. But were you successful because you met a certain person? Were you successful because of the market that you decided to sell to? Were you successful because of the language you used? I mean, any number of those things. So I remember very distinctly, I was teaching these networking workshops that were next to impossible to fill. It drove me nuts trying to get people to come to a networking workshop, right? Like, it was a lot of work. And during one of these workshops, I take 15 minutes for something that was a side dish, for something that I was like, okay, this is kind of this interesting thing that I've been kind of toying around with. And I'm going to take 15 minutes to talk to you all about it. Now, mind you, 2 days worth of like deep instruction on networking, right? So I said in this 15 minutes, I said, I have a theory that if you create a referable brand for yourself, if you make it so that other people are talking about you when you're not there, that people will just want to introduce you to other people because you become the shiny object to them.
Yes.
You become the thing that makes them look cool to their market. And I get to the end of this workshop, 2 days worth of teaching, ask everybody what they want their hot seat to be on. And everybody says they want their hot seat to be on how to create a referable brand. So I'm like, well, this is the thing that people want.
Yes.
This is the thing that's interesting. So I shifted everything and said,
Yes.
okay, I'm going to break down, I'm going to give you the frameworks to create a referable brand. And then as I started working with clients, I realized, oh, you can actually increase the power of your level of referability by doing all of the relationship building stuff I was teaching. So the mistake that we make is that we think that we need to build a network and sell a service. And that is wrong. We need to come up with an interesting concept that a network would be fascinated by, something referable, something interesting, and then build the network around that. We're doing it in the wrong order. The best thing we can do is create something that's interesting and exciting for people, and then go to the network and say, I've got this thing that's gonna make you look good if you share it. Do you want to share it?
I am smiling so big right now. That is so great. It is it's very congruent with what's happening for me personally. And it is an incredible concept. I never thought of, well, we've been doing it wrong. I've thought of like what you've done, just what you've just said, how to create a referable brand. It flips networking on its head, which is fantastic, right? So that you're creating the thing and then creating the network around the thing versus, hi, I do such and such, buy my stuff. Hi, it's like, if I give away 100 business cards in an event, I'm down 100 cards. So I must have met 100 interesting people, and maybe somebody will contact me. It's like, no, maybe they folded your card and they put it in their pocket so they can chuck it later, right? It's like,
yeah. And I tell people this all the time, where it's like, if you want your business to do one of three things, and it's easy to remember, because if you don't do at least one of these three things, you'll be sad, SAD. And that is solve a problem, alleviate pain, or decrease friction. Ideally, you do all three, but you got to hit at least one in order for it to be a need to have as opposed to a nice to have. Like, you've really got to ask, am I solving a problem for people? Am I getting rid of pain? Or am I making it so that there is less friction in whatever it is that they're doing? If I'm not doing any of those things, I've got a vitamin. I don't have a painkiller.
Very nice. Yeah. Yeah. And when you sell it, you poke on the problem and you point out the pain so that you can then say, look at my solution. That's fantastic. Michael, I could talk to you for days. This is fabulous. Seriously, this is really good. I so appreciate you. What didn't I ask you? What were you hoping that I could ask or would ask? And or what big lessons would you like to leave for my audience?
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of different sort of directions we could, we could of course go, but I think one of the things that sort of ties all of this together is this idea of you can't underestimate the significance of making other people feel significant. And everything that you're doing, you have to look at it through that lens. Whether or not you want people to share your idea, whether or not you want them to buy your stuff, you have to look at whatever it is that you're selling, whatever it is that you're creating, whatever it is that you're putting together through the lens of how is this valuable to them? And I think that the mistake that we make, especially when we're sort of inundated with all of these ideas of branding being about how do we look cool, that we forget that referability and true influence in terms of a market is making other people look cool when they share your ideas.
Huge.
Yeah.
Right. And that's even if you're not in business, even if you are somebody who stocks product at a grocery store, to keep that in mind. How do I make other people feel significant allows people to go, there was that one person that was amazing at this grocery store, or, it's like, that's awesome. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is so good. Tell me where to tell people, right? So how do we get our audience to find you, to subscribe to your blog, to all that stuff?
Yeah. So I have a tool called myreferabilityrater.com, where you can actually take a test to see how referable you are and start to see kind of like where you match up with the main factors of referability. So that's a really solid tool. And when you get that, you get an email from me and you can get on the daily email list and all of that fun stuff. And then my website is just smallpondenterprises.com. You can always go there, and there's some other goodies over there as well.
All right, I'm going to say it again, partly so I know as I'm writing. So as I'm talking, I'm looking down, obviously, and it's not because there's anything interesting on my floor or whatever. I'm writing. I am writing. So myreferabilityrater.com.
Yep.
And smallpondenterprises.com. I have not checked out my referability rater yet. So nice. I'm going to do that because I think that'd be awesome. And Small Pond Enterprises, I'm on your mailing list. I get your email. Love to connect with you. Love to stay connected with you. So thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It was an absolute blast.
It was a blast. I feel like this is the first of many conversations. So
totally, 100%.
Really good. Really good. All righty. Cool. My guest, Michael Roderick, myreferabilityrater.com and smallpondenterprises.com. This is One Sharp Sword, cutting through to what matters most. I am the host, Dr. Wayne Purnell, Dr. P, your breakthrough success coach.